Birth Your Way, Fort Collins. I am thrilled today to have Paige on. Paige is a certified nurse midwife. And is actually my midwife, part of my midwife team, for full disclosure. I'm so happy to have you here, Paige. Paige is kind of known in the birth community as very VBAC friendly. So if you are looking for a VBAC, I'm really excited for you to hear the episode with her. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yay!
Yeah.
I would love to hear about what brought you to birth work, Paige.
Yeah, so they always joke that birth is a calling, and I truly believe that. It's not meant for everybody, and it's a big commitment in your life, and so you really do have to be called to it. And to be honest, I never knew that the calling was going to come to me. When I was in nursing school, I had full expectation that I was going to be a pediatric oncology nurse. I'm not sure why I wanted to deal with children with cancer, but that sounded like my calling at the time. Yeah. So I was going to nursing school with that anticipation that I was going to become a nurse practitioner and do pediatric oncology. While I was in nursing school, we got to the maternity section where we learned about labor, delivery, postpartum, just all those things. And it was definitely interesting, but pretty much every female in my class told me that they wanted to do labor and delivery. That was the nurse they wanted to be. And I honestly was like, ew, that sounds gross. I don't think I'm into that. Then we did our clinical rotation and it completely changed me. And everybody who wanted to be a labor nurse was like, I don't like that. And I was like, I loved that. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever watched. I couldn't believe that just happened. And it was like so casual and comfortable because my first birth I ever got to witness was a midwife in a hospital setting. Wow. And so that was just, I was like totally taken back. I was like, I didn't even know this was a career option. I had no idea I would be into this. I was like, I need to know more. So I continued to pursue it. Luckily, there wasn't a lot of people interested in labor after our clinicals. So it ended up flipping, and I was one of the few that were into it. So then when I was in nursing school, I pursued doing my practicum, where you get to like practice as being a nurse with just one nurse by yourself, not with like your whole group of all your students in the class. I did it in labor and delivery on that same floor I saw my first birth. So I got really comfortable being a labor nurse. I felt really comfortable. I got my first job out of nursing school in labor and delivery, which we call a labor princess, because you didn't have to go do any other nursing. You got to go straight into labor and delivery.
I didn't know that.
But I think labor princesses are not so bad. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do and I pursued it. I didn't think I needed other nursing skills. I needed to like know labor in and out. And it's such a unique type of nursing that you really don't have to go do med surg or something like that first. So I worked in a small community hospital. At our hospital, we only had 4 labor rooms, and I think we had like 7 or 8 postpartum rooms. It was LDRP, which is labor, delivery, recovery, and postpartum. So basically, it's all one big unit. You don't have 2 separate ones. You would recover them and you move them over to postpartum room, and oftentimes you would stay their nurse. We didn't have physicians in-house. There were no midwives at this hospital. The physicians were taking call from home. We didn't have any kind of like nurse practitioner that came in for babies. We didn't have a NICU. We didn't have anesthesia in house. It was kind of just nurses ran the hospital and we called people as we needed them. Okay. So I joke for years I was cosplaying a midwife because I would basically, somebody would come in labor. I would be like, yep, you're in labor. We would do all the things. You know, if they wanted their epidural, we would get that. And then the doctor would be home this whole time. And then I would be like, okay, it's time to push. And I would call the doctor, hey, she's ready to push. She got here at this time, da 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 da. Give them full report as if I've been managing the care the entire time. Exactly. And then they would come in and the baby was crowning and they'd catch the baby and then I would take care of the mom postpartum. And so it felt like I was just already doing midwifery care. And the more and more I did that, the more and more I wanted to know women, not just in labor and birth and postpartum, I wanted to know like their entire lives. So then I started looking into midwifery care, and CNM seemed like the easiest route at the time just because I was already a nurse with my bachelor's degree. Yeah. So then after I think 3 years of doing bedside nursing out in that small community hospital, I decided to apply to midwifery school, got in, did that, worked full-time while in school full-time, which was a lot. And then during school, there was a time where I was like, maybe this isn't for me. I was working at a really big, busy teaching hospital. They did C-sections like probably 50% of the time. Wow. It just didn't feel like what I wanted to do. And then I kind of got to the point where I was like, you know, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should go back to nursing and I can make a difference at the bedside. I don't need to be the provider. But then halfway through my school, I got an email that I was accepted to be a midwife student at Bloom and Babies Birth Center in Grand Junction. So me and my husband packed all our things. We moved across the country from Florida, and I got to see birth center care, and it completely reinstilled in me what I'm supposed to do as a midwife. I saw my first water birth. I got to do lots of water births there, very low intervention care, just like a small group of midwives like leading these women. The women were very intentional about why they chose that birth center, how they treated their pregnancy, how they wanted their birth to go. And it was just so beautiful to see it laid out like that. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to stay here forever now. Of course, they they weren't hiring. So then I moved back to Fort Collins where we originally had planned to live. And I worked as a travel nurse figuring out where I wanted to live. And that's ultimately how I landed at a woman's place as a midwife.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize. So you're doing travel nursing and like with the intention of trying to find the community that you
yeah, because I mean, I knew I loved blooming babies so much, and I wasn't willing to go somewhere that wasn't going to foster what I was doing there.
Yeah.
So I figured I could do like an inside job as a travel nurse, and I could, you know what I mean, see, oh, I liked working with that provider, and I didn't like that group so much, and talk to the nurses. Who do you guys like to work with? Who do you go to for your care?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I knew PVH was on the road to get water births eventually, so that was definitely a big thing. I'm like, I want to catch babies at PVH. I really like the nursing staff there. And then there was 2 midwife groups at the time who were catching babies at PVH. And I really liked the larger group, but then I actually met Jess finally, and I just like clicked. I was like, this is who I'm meant to work with, this small practice, midwife owned. And when I thought about like, what kind of a midwife do I want to be? And like, how do I want to grow up as a baby midwife? I saw myself with like these midwives who have had experience and were going to take me under their wing and teach me the way, because that's what I really had at Bloom & Babies Birth Center. I didn't want like a bunch of physicians to be bringing me up, because then I thought my practice was going to change, and I thought we would just butt heads, and I wanted it to be this foster, like this elder midwife is teaching me the ways kind of thing. And not that Jess is elder, but she did have the experience, and that was what I was looking for at the time. Yeah. So
I love how that, in retrospect, you know, you opened with it's a calling, and that's very common in the birth world. It is like once you hear the call, you can't unhear it, and then like so many different things along your path, reminded you.
Yes.
Kind of brought you home in a way.
100%. I'll never forget when I was a student at that big, busy teaching hospital in Florida, and I was like crying before I would go in the clinic because I was just like, I don't know if I even want to be here today. Maybe I should just call it today. And I went back to see who my first client was going to be, and somebody from the front was like, Paige, somebody is here to see you. And I was like, oh gosh, like what happened? She's like, there's somebody up front. I don't know. She says she has something for you. And I'm like thinking I'm in trouble. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I walk up as one of the clients I had caught a week prior, and that had been my like only birth in the last week, and it was a long one. And she originally didn't even want a student, but she ended up being open to me at the end. And so she came in and she had this little gift for me, and it was so sweet. And yeah, there was a notebook with a quote on it. I wish I could remember it now. And it was such a good quote. And she just like, thank you for all that you did. Like, you really supported our family. And I was like, oh, that was such a moment there. I was like, I need to stay in this. I need to see this through.
Oh, so. like little signals to you.
Yes.
Like, hang in
there.
You're going to find your place.
Yes. Yeah. And especially coming from somebody who didn't want a student initially, but then was open to it once she met me, kind of thing. I was like, okay, I am meant to do this. People will like me. I can help people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad, like you kept getting reminders that you're here to serve our community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit like why you chose to be a certified nurse midwife, because there are different types of midwives.
Yes.
So a CNM, certified nurse midwife, versus a CPM, certified professional midwife.
Yes.
Can you speak to a little bit about like someone who's considering a midwife, why they might choose a CNM over a CPM or vice versa?
I mean, realistically, I think there's a lot of differences, but there's also not. At the end of the day, we're both midwives. And I think there's this weird culture where we're like, oh, home birth midwives only, can do these things, and CNMs will act like an OB in the hospital. But at the end of the day, like, midwifery care is midwifery care. And I think either party could do it. The biggest difference is just education, but that doesn't like say for lack of experience. So I have a master's degree that focuses in nursing and particularly in midwifery. And then CPMs, they can have bachelor's degrees. They don't necessarily need to, but they get a lot of hands-on training. So I think that's the biggest difference, just that I have a master's degree in this. And to some people that sounds really nice on paper, but I always remind people, like, I've worked with CPMs who I think are amazing and honestly more skilled than me. And then on the flip side of that, I've worked with CNMs who I probably would never let in my birth space, So I think it can go either way. Same even goes for OBs. I've had OBs who I feel like practice like midwives and are just wonderful providers, and then on the other side, not so much. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest difference between a CNM and a CPM, is just the education level. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean for lack of experience, and at the end of the day, it really, who do you trust is what really matters. So if that is something that's important to you, a CNM might sound better. Like, where we practice is also a big thing. CNMs can practice at home, birth centers, or hospitals, where CPMs are limited to birth centers and home. So that is a big difference, I would say, too.
Yeah. I believe just for the wider public who I don't think is in this world, like CNMs can do home births, but often don't because liability is very expensive for CNMs in a way it's not for CPMs.
Exactly.
Okay.
That is true. We have to have malpractice insurance kind of thing, and CPMs don't necessarily need to. Yeah, which is a bummer because if malpractice insurance wasn't so expensive for midwives, I would love to offer things like home births, but it is definitely, it's a hard medium.
Cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
Well, to that end, thinking about like you and your team at A Woman's Place, can you kind of speak to what makes you all unique as a practice and as a team?
Yeah, so we're midwife owned, woman owned. So Jessica is the lead midwife and the owner of the practice. So I think that's very unique in that most CNM practices are, it's like a larger group owned by an OBGYN or owned by just like a big medical practice like UC Health, Banner, or something of that nature. But we're small, we're private practice. We're just a team of 4 midwives. We're small on purpose. So I always remind people that we want you to get to know all 4 of us. We think all 4 of us should have 4 similar answers, not 4 vastly different answers if you ask all 4 of us the same question. So we all have the same philosophies on birth. We all kind of are like-minded. And yeah, we're just that smaller private practice and being midwife owned, and we don't have anybody overseeing our care essentially. So we're very much independent practitioners, which is amazing. That was a big piece of, I didn't want somebody overseeing me, constantly asking me what I'm doing and
why you're doing it, justify why you're doing it.
Exactly. Like I just wanted to practice like a midwife and stay in my scope and do the things I know how to do well. So that's the biggest difference between A Woman's Place and other local practices, I would say, is that we are like small midwife owned and midwife led kind of practice. We also catch babies in a hospital. So we catch babies at PVH, as you know. And Poudre Valley Hospital is more unique in the sense that we can do water births. So a lot of our clients don't have IVs. A lot of them are kind of walking in active labor, not having any intervention, and then getting in the tub and having their baby there. So it's nice to be able to offer that kind of home-like environment. We'll never be able to replicate the home birth environment. I wish we could, but at the end of the day, it is a hospital. But kind of bringing that birth center element maybe a little bit more into the hospital. So we do support that at the hospital, and that makes us unique too. Not every midwife group has the capability to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, A Woman's Place is very special practice that I always hope people in our community know about.
Yes,
it's a good fit for a lot of people.
Definitely, I know, and we're not for everybody, and I totally understand that, you know. But I think if you're looking for like that intimate, more in-depth care and to get to know 4 people really well and trust no matter who is at your birth, like we are a good fit for a lot of low-risk women. Yeah.
When women do come to you and they're thinking about having you as your midwife, what are some of the top questions that they ask you?
Ooh, so one of the top questions is, what is the difference between a midwife and an OB? I think I hear that almost every day or every time somebody is considering to come in. And I always tell people that a midwife and an OB are both very well trained in birth. So you keep that in mind. The only biggest difference is that an OB is a surgeon on top of it. So OBs are excellent surgeons. They're really familiar with their gyne surgeries and C-sections, whereas midwives, we cannot perform surgery. So that's the biggest difference, I think. It's also how we see pregnancy and like our model of care almost. So when you look at an OB, they kind of see everything as like an illness. There's a pathological process. How do we fix this kind of thing? Medications, interventions, all those things kind of come into play. And that's just how they're taught in school, is that pregnancy is kind of an illness and like we have to treat it as such, and we have to do these interventions so that women and babies are healthy and happy. Whereas in midwife world, we don't see pregnancy as an illness. We see pregnancy as like a part of life. It's very physiologic. It a lot of times is a natural process that doesn't necessarily always need medical intervention, not this big medical intervention that sometimes needs or sometimes happens naturally. So we always joke that a doctor was saying, oh, doctors are the harness that holds you up and midwives are the safety net kind of thing. And so in midwife world, like we don't feel like everybody needs a harness. Like we're there if you need us for any kind of safety reason, but at the end of the day, this is going to happen normal most of the time. So I think that's a huge difference. And when people are considering who to go to for their care, we try to explain the difference between an OB and a midwife really thoroughly so that they understand like you need to go where you feel most comfortable, but also like how are you seeing your pregnancy and birth? Because if you're seeing it as an illness and a pathological thing, you actually might be a better fit for an OB.
And you may have a condition that would warrant extra care, or specialized care from an OBGYN. And I was a home birth midwife recently who is kind of advocating for, there's like a co-care model. Like if you need both kinds of care, there are ways
Yes.
to work with both an OBGYN and a midwife.
Yes, collaboration's so key because, I mean, we have really good relationships with maternal fetal medicine, which are high-risk doctors that don't actually catch babies in the hospital, but they know everything abnormal that could happen in pregnancy. They see you for ultrasounds and they make recommendations. And to be totally honest, sometimes we refer people to MFM and I'm like, they're going to say that they risk out of our care. And a lot of times MFMs are like, no, you got this. Here's all the things you should do, which is super nice that we have that good relationship where they feel like they can trust us to care for somebody maybe a little bit higher risk, but not so high risk that they need to be seen by an OB.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any questions that you wish clients would ask you?
Ooh, I wish clients asked me a little bit more about my birth philosophy. Yeah, I think so many people get stuck on OB versus midwife and like, how does your practice work? Where do you catch the babies? But a lot of people don't actually know like what matters to me as a midwife.
Because that comes in, that will be in the room whether you know about it or not. Yeah.
Exactly. Like it's going to come out at some point, but I wish they just kind of asked me more up front because we do a lot of hello visits where people come, they're trialing out different practices. So they come and say hello and ask questions. There's a lot of very direct questions about like, where do you catch babies? How does your practice work? How many midwives are you? But nobody ever is like, who are you as a person? And like, what's your philosophy on birth? And I think I'd like more of that because I think when people understand like that, not only me, but all my colleagues as well, that we really are seeing birth as this natural process that sometimes needs medical intervention, not this big medical intervention that sometimes happens naturally, then people are more inclined to be like, oh, that's actually how I'm seeing it too. And that's a lot of times where we just link up a little bit more and there's more of that connection. Exactly. Yeah. So I think it would help me connect with people a little bit more if they asked about our philosophy and how do we see birth, because then I think they'd be like, oh, that's how I'm seeing it too. And then we'd have that better connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I hear from clients who are considering midwifery care but aren't, because there's a real fear around birth. And that's something that we work through a lot. But sometimes I hear the fear from clients of like, I do believe that birth is a natural physiological process. It's part of life. But if something happens and I have a midwife, what can I expect? Like if they're trained in natural or like physiological birth that I actually need a medical intervention, what does that look like in order to kind of like assuage that fear? Yeah,
so fear is normal, especially for something you've never done before. And even if you have done birth before, but you're hoping it goes differently this time, there's still gonna be fear there. What if it ends up the same? Or what if it's not what I'm hoping for? So I think a little bit of fear is healthy and that's a natural part. And I think if you have no fear going into birth, that's almost kind of concerning. There should be a healthy dose of fear there.
Yeah.
But I also think like there's a lot of people who are like birth without fear. And like, yes, I think you can get to that point because probably 90% of birth is mental. So if you can overcome that fear by like with words of affirmation, with like knowing what's going on and just feeling empowered, I think that makes a huge difference. We also have a lot of talks with people about, a lot of times we're sitting on our hands and we're not doing anything, but there are times when we have to use our hands and like, what would that intervention look like? And I think like having those conversations in the office, we qualm a lot of that fear inside people. So when we talk about water birth, people are like, I really want a water birth, but what if something happens? So we go through, I'm like, here's all the benefits of it and here's all the risk of it. And so we talk about those risks and I'm like, and if this happens, here's what I'm going to do. Here's how I'm going to talk to you. You're still going to have informed consent and I'm going to walk you through every step of the way. So I think a lot of people, when they realize that midwives also have the skills to deal with a lot of emergencies and a lot of things that aren't even emergencies, but just, not how we plan this to go. When we have the skills and capability to deal with that, it kind of gets rid of a lot of those fears for people. And they're like, okay, even if this happens, like I'm still going to have my midwife with me. She's still going to walk me through this. Even for like maybe the scariest thing of all, a C-section, because I think that's where most people's fear lives, is that they don't want a C-section. I'm not like, I tell people, if you need a C-section, I'm not gonna, just rush you back and be like, bye, so sorry, I'm never gonna see you again. Like, no, we're gonna have talks about it. I'm gonna recommend it for whatever reason. We're gonna talk about why I'm recommending it. I'm gonna ask how you feel about it. And then I'm gonna go get the OB down the hall and I'm gonna be like, hey, here's so-and-so. I want you to meet them. They're a great surgeon. They're gonna consent you for the surgery. And then I'm still not gonna say goodbye at that point. Now I'm going to follow you and I'm a first assist. So I'm going to be able to be right there across from the surgeon the entire time, helping with the surgery. I'll be talking to you in the OR and I'm right there with you the whole time. And then afterwards, you're still going to see me for all your postpartum care. I'm going to make sure you're doing okay. So you don't lose that midwife in that moment, which I think is huge. I think a lot of people think if the scariest thing happens, they're going to lose the one person they trust. And that's the scariest thing of all. And they have this random OB who's now going to cut them open. But we're right there with you the whole time. It's just like we're hiring a surgeon for a need in that moment. Even in like if an emergency emergency were to happen, like a shoulder dystocia, like we all feel very confident in managing a shoulder dystocia. If it got to a point where I was like, hey, I cannot get this baby out, I'm going to call the OB down the hall. And I would have said that to the client, like, hey, I'm going to have the OB step in right now. Like, this is an emergency and I can't get your baby out. Yeah. So sometimes it's just being able to have those calm conversations with people before it happens so that when it happens, they're not shocked. I had a shoulder dystocia actually this last year. We suspected the baby was large and we had conversations about should we induce, should we not, what was the most recent growth ultrasound. We talked about what shoulder dystocia would look like. And then it happened and I was able to get the baby out. Baby did totally amazing. Everything went really well. And afterwards I was like, okay, we need a debrief. How are you feeling? And she's like, honestly, I was really calm. I knew you were going to get the baby out. And I was like, in my head, I felt like I was screaming. I guess I was very calm too, though. Yeah. But I think also I had this sense of like, I knew I was going to get the baby out and she was so calm and did everything I needed when I asked of her because we'd already had those conversations ahead of time. Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing when you're dispelling fear in birth is like, what's everything that can go right and what's everything that can go wrong. And it's like reckless to just assume nothing can go wrong. We have to have those conversations about like, yes, this can go wrong. We don't want to focus on it, but if it happens, I just want them to feel well supported because then it's not going to be this super scary thing. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. My follow-up question was going to be, can you share an example of a challenging birth someone might have a fear around? It's a shoulder dystocia, which is essentially when the baby's shoulder gets stuck. Like the baby's head is bored and we need to get the rest of the baby born within about 5 minutes. Is that right? Ideally. Yeah, can you speak more about that experience, like the concrete, like what happens when you notice, okay, something is not going physiologically as we need it to? Yeah, so babies, when they come out, they kind of come out usually looking down, hopefully. So they come out like this, and then their shoulders rotate or they restitute, and then the shoulder pops under the pubic bone and the whole body comes out. So if that shoulder gets caught there, that can be really scary because now the head is out and baby will start to make efforts to breathe and transition from extrauterine life from intrauterine life. So when that's happening, they're getting a little bit of oxygen through the core, but at the end of the day, they're very squeezed just based on where they're at in the vagina at that time. So there's a lot of different maneuvers to try to get baby. A lot of it's just position change. My water birth clients, it's always a huge fear. Like, what if I'm in the water and this happens? And I tell people, I actually prefer to manage a shoulder dystocia in the water. Exactly. Yeah. They're not trying to breathe yet. And you're typically already in the position I need you to be in, which is usually a hands and knees position. And sometimes like a runner's lunge where I put one leg forward or back, like you're about to start a race. So a lot of times when they're unmedicated in the water, I can get them to do that really quickly, which is super helpful. Yeah. If position's not working, sometimes I have to do some internal maneuvers where I kind of go in and try to rotate or corkscrew the baby out. So sometimes that has to be necessary. Sometimes we put them on their back. We put their knees all the way to the ears, which is always a crazy position, McRoberts. Yeah. And that kind of pops the pubic bone up, which sometimes can help the shoulder come out under. And sometimes we do suprapubic pressure where we have the nurse or assistant, like they put their fist above the pubic bone to try to rotate that shoulder down where we're trying to get it to go. Yeah. And there's like so many moving pieces in all of that. So a lot of it's like being very openly communicative with your team. So talking about like, I would tell the nurse, I need her in this position. Like I would ask the mom, hey, I need you to get in this position right now. Is it okay if we do this? You're gonna feel some pressure above your pubic bone. And having those conversations as it's happening, and then somebody's recording everything as it's happening as well. Yeah. So it's well documented too. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And honestly, and that was a challenging birth, like in a skills sense. But interestingly enough, one of my most challenging births I've ever had was actually a mom who, she did not want anybody in the birth room with her. She didn't want her partner. She didn't want any family members. She didn't want a doula. She didn't want anybody. And that was so challenging for me. But she was in the hospital? Yeah, she was in the hospital being induced, but she didn't want anybody there with her. And she's like, no, it's not like a bad relationship with anybody. She's like, I'm a really private person. I just kind of want to like come back into myself and do this on my own. And that was so difficult for me because I think I like to be there with people. And I was like, this fine line of, I don't want to be overly supportive and overbearing, but I also don't want to leave her completely alone. Because I think so much of birth is like this, like it's, I don't know, this community kind of experience. And obviously like you don't want 10 million people at your birth. Like it is a private event, but it's also like this, I don't know, moment for people to come together. And even midwife means with woman. Mm-hmm. So to just leave somebody during their most vulnerable time of their life and just hope that it all goes well, it was really hard on me to figure out like, how do I want to navigate this? And I begged her to hire a doula. I even found people in network with their insurance and they would cover it and she still didn't want to. And you just can't force that on somebody. So it's that fine line of like, I want to be supportive, but I also can't be overbearing and force things on people. Yeah. So that was, honestly, that was the most challenging birth for me ever because I didn't know how to support her. And I think a lot of her like things that came up in her birth, I think a lot of it stemmed from she didn't have somebody there supporting her like really deeply. I did the best I could, but I think there's just a different level of having your partner there, your family, your doula, like those relationships you build with people, and that trust is so important. And to have nobody there, I just think I think there's a lot of like loneliness that kind of manifested in her body.
Yeah, I was gonna ultimately. Yeah, how was the birth? Like, did she just call you?
Yeah.
And she's like, I think I'm pushing. Or?
No, yeah, it was an induction, and then we did get completely dilated. She was actually a VBAC, and she opted for the induction. That was her choice, and then she made all the decisions, and then got an epidural, and then we pushed for a little while, and she just couldn't get the baby low enough for even like a vacuum assisted birth or anything like that. It was really, really hard, especially when we got to that point where we had to call it because it was just like she was so distant and there was nobody else we could like help bring her back to earth a little bit. Yeah. So I really struggled with that birth. Yeah.
Speaking of VBAC, I mentioned at the top of the episode, and I always like to name this because in the birth community, when clients come to us with specific birth visions, they're like, okay, I really want a VBAC-friendly provider. Like A Woman's Place is at the top of the list. Yeah. So I'd love for you to speak to why you feel that is. And your perspective on vaginal birth after C-section.
Yeah, VBACs are probably one of my favorite births. There's just this different level of empowerment there. I think a lot of times when people are going for a VBAC, their first birth, they felt like they were wrong, decisions might have been made they didn't agree with, or it might have just been a true emergency and they had really no other option in that moment. So a lot of them are seeking like this really redemptive experience. And so to be able to meet them there and walk that journey with them to redemption, it's like the best thing in the world, especially because so many people are good VBAC candidates but don't know it. And a lot of people have been told, oh, once a C-section, always a C-section, and that's just not true. So yeah, we love VBACs at A Woman's Place, especially I really enjoy them. And a big difference, I think a lot of people there's so many things out there about VBACs now. Your risk of uterine rupture is so high. Like, why would you risk that and all these things? And
what is high?
I know. And it's like 1% or less. So that's very low. And it's funny because C-sections carry a lot of risk as well. And I feel like we focus so much sometimes on the VBAC risk, but not on the C-section risk. And you have to have those conversations about there's risk to anything. I mean,
you're just choosing between risk.
Exactly. Yeah. Risk tolerance is like one of my favorite words. And, some people are willing to tolerate really high risk and other people aren't. Even with something as simple as like raw meat in pregnancy. People are like, look, I'm going to go get my sushi once a month and I'm going to eat it. And I'm like, that's okay. Other people they're like, nope, I get my like steaks well done and make sure they burn it, So everybody has a different risk tolerance and it's all about meeting people where they're at. But yeah, no, VBACs that's just my favorite birth. I don't know. There's a level of redemption there. I feel like we almost connect more because they're looking for that person to guide them through it kind of thing. I mean, typically they've been very wronged. I think that's another hard thing. VBACs come with a lot of trauma sometimes, and not always. Sometimes it was just, hey, my baby was breech and this was a scheduled thing. But sometimes it's, I was, a home birth and I transferred after pushing for 6 hours and I pushed 2 more hours at the hospital and they told me I would never ever push a big baby out. And, it's kind of running through those risks with them and being like, I think you can do this. And sometimes just having somebody tell them, like a provider, be like, I think you can do this, it changes their whole perspective. And then when the mental shift is there, I feel like VBACs are more successful. If I might be kind of strict with my VBACs a little bit, I tell them like I want them to get their spiritual, their mental, and their physical health all aligned, and I think that is the key to a like proper VBAC. So spiritual, I want them to connect, whether it's like something religious, if it's community, if it's whatever it may be, I want them to get that in line. And then physical, a lot of times I'm like, this is like a team group effort. I want you doing like prenatal massages. I want you seeing a chiropractor. I want you to talk about pelvic floor PT if you were pushing for hours on end, getting everything balanced and ready for the baby. And then step 4 is the mental aspect. I have them usually go on the VBAC link and I want them to start listening to success stories on that podcast. I want them to read success stories. I even want them to read the uterine rupture that was super scary, but the mom felt so good about it because she was so well supported. Like I want them to get in that mindset, like no matter what, I'm going to get this VBAC. And if not, like I'm still going to be really well supported. And I'm going to make choices for me and my baby that were correct. So I think that's like a big thing with VBAC. And I think so many people are just like, oh yeah, we'll just go for it and see what happens. But if you get the spiritual, the mental, and the physical all prepared, it's such a formula for a good VBAC.
I love that. As a VBAC mom. Yes, I agree and endorse. But also, it made me think of something you said earlier, how you wish people asked more about your personal philosophy of birth. I think something when clients are trying to choose a VBAC provider, if that's a goal of theirs, and how to choose a provider that's going to support their decision is to find a provider whose risk tolerance is aligned with theirs. So can you speak a little bit to your own risk tolerance with VBAC?
Yeah. So I feel like almost everybody is a really good candidate for VBAC. If they had a low scar, even if they had a special scar, there's some moms I'm going to support with a special scar, and I legally can't be their midwife, but I am sending them to a provider who's going to support them, be there as their doula. But yeah, so I think everybody, for the most part, is actually a good VBAC candidate. And with the risk tolerance, I'm probably, maybe I would take more risk than the average provider. There's this new terminology coined by the VBAC link, I think, of VBAC friendly and VBAC tolerant. And so there's a lot of bait and switch language early on that I think clients should really kind of scope out. Like, is this provider VBAC friendly or are they VBAC tolerant? If they're pulling out the calculator that has no evidence base whatsoever, it's based on your age, your weight, or your BMI, and how far along, how many centimeters dilated you made it in your last, that's the calculator, and it'll tell you your success rate of a VBAC. I have seen those calculators be so far gone. They're not evidence-based at all. So snuffing out those kind of things, but a lot of people use that as that's their risk tolerance. And if you have less than 80% chance on that calculator, they won't do it. So that's like a big piece of it. And that, whereas me, I'm like, let's not look at a calculator that has no evidence. Instead, like, let's talk about everything with your first birth and like where it went right or wrong, and like what happened, and if something could have been different. I think a lot of people with VBACs who did push for a really long time or had a larger baby, they were told like, oh, your pelvis is too small, or oh, you just pushed too long, your babies are too big, something of that nature. But a lot of times if you listen to the entire story, and they tend to be quite long because they are long, kind of traumatic births, you'll find out like, oh, the baby was kind of malpositioned, and people are like, you don't feel the baby down there? And the mom's like, no, the baby felt like it was in my hip the whole time. Or the baby came out like really cockeyed and then kind of went back up and never made its way back down. Like, there was another factor there that the baby was influencing, and they just couldn't make it down because of the position they were in. Maybe the pelvis was unaligned. Maybe we were too numb with the epidural. Maybe we started pushing too soon. There's so many factors there. So I feel like a lot of times if you just listen to the entire story, hear it, and then tell them, I really think that this is why this happened. And I think this time, if we could avoid where this happened again, I think you could have a VBAC. And then a lot of times they're like, oh, that makes sense to me. Oh. So yeah, I've had so many moms who were told like, oh, you just make 9-pound babies. They're not going to come out of you. Or, you push for 6 hours, like clearly your pelvis just can't do it. But then you listen to the story, I'm like, no, that baby was crooked. Or no, that mom was in a really poor position for pushing and like wasn't allowed to move because her epidural was too dense or something of that nature. Yeah. And then they'll have their VBAC and they walk in super dilated. You know what I mean? They push out this like 9-10 pound baby with like no tears. And I'm like, that is insane to me that if you hadn't come to me, somebody would have talked you into another C-section, because that was a really successful thing. Yeah.
The perspective is so important to it.
Definitely. Yeah. And even when a TOLAC is not successful, we don't get a VBAC and they end up with a repeat C-section. A lot of times, like when the client makes that decision, I think that's an important piece too. And they're like, look, I'm too exhausted. I want another C-section. Or, I've gotten to this point, I'm just not comfortable anymore. Like, I want that. And so I think that's another huge piece, is like, a lot of times I let people guide what they want. Obviously, if something's unsafe, I'm going to say something and make a recommendation. But if everything's going well and it's just a level of like maternal exhaustion or maternal choice, like I also want to support them in that. Like, I think we all have free will, and if we want a C-section, we should get a C-section. If we want a VBAC, like we should try everything in our power to get that.
Yeah. So yeah, I love it. I mean, yeah, even when, as you said, like a client ultimately decides to have a cesarean section, the way they feel about it is what matters. And I know, speaking from my own experience, like ultimately when I said I want to have a VBAC, I did, but also I just wanted to be in charge of my birth.
Exactly.
And that's a very different preparation process than the first time when I just didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's so helpful to find a provider who understands that and will support the client in going through that journey for themselves.
Definitely.
Paige, who would you say is a really good fit for you in your practice?
Ooh, a good fit for our practice and me would be a low risk mom. I mean, definitely we can't do super high risk stuff, but a low risk mom who's just looking for a really empowered birth experience and wants to like own it, I would say. I'm really bad about like telling people what they should do. I really want people to make their own choices. I love talking about the risk, the benefits, the alternatives to everything. Like, that's actually one of the questions I wish people ask me more. What's the risk to this? What's the benefit to this? And is there an alternative to this? But I really want people who want to make their own choices so that they, can have the birth that they want, and they want to do the work beforehand, kind of thing. Yeah. And that's not for everybody. I think a lot of people want to come into pregnancy and birth and be told what to do and be told like hey, this is the right thing. We're taking no risk at all, and this is what you have to do. But in our world, at our practice, we're like, we're never going to force you to do anything. I'm going to give you all the information about everything, and I'm going to let you make an informed choice. A lot of people talk about informed consent so much, and informed consent is so important, but informed declination is equally as important. And I feel like that's a important thing. Like, somebody has to be able to make informed consent with me, but also make informed declinations for things with me. So I think that, like, as long as you have that choice and you want to make choices for yourself, that I think you'd be a really good fit for our practice.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Are you able to maybe list, like, if someone's trying to discern if they are low risk and they're not sure, like, what are the high risk things?
I mean, high risk things are things that essentially would require a surgeon. So a placenta previa, that's too high risk for us. That's where the placenta lives over the cervix, and there's no way a placenta can't be born before a baby. So that is definitely not. Super uncontrolled, like high blood pressures before even getting pregnant, that's a definite no. Really, there's not a lot.
Even like if someone has gestational diabetes.
Gestational diabetes we can take. Yep, we can take diet controlled as well as insulin controlled, because we have a good collaboration with maternal fetal medicine. So we get the recommendations from their diabetes educators. Preeclampsia doesn't disclose. So if you've been with us throughout the entire pregnancy and you get preeclampsia at 38 weeks, that's okay. We're going to keep you, and we're going to do all the things and have those discussions. Even gestational hypertension after 20 weeks, we don't have to get rid of those clients from our practice either. We've even had a couple of chronic hypertension clients. So these are people who already had high blood pressure before going into pregnancy, but were really well managed, were on meds, so very well controlled. We were able to keep them with collaboration with some physicians. And then so really anything, as long as you don't have like a true surgical need, you would be okay. I did one time have to let somebody go because she came for her first appointment and she had a pacemaker. So I was like, with like a heart condition like that and a pacemaker in place that's keeping your heart at a functioning rhythm, there's just too much cardiology and like high risk involved in that.
Right.
Yeah. And if you're unsure, I think one of the best things people could do is to just come see us and talk to us about their risk. I mean, the first appointment is really diving into your whole medical history and talking about what is this risk and what is the benefit to this, and is this even a safe thing to do?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, Paige, thank you.
Yeah.
Where can the people find you?
Oh, you can find us at A Woman's Place here in Fort Collins. I'm also on Instagram. I just have like a personal account. We also have like a Woman's Place Instagram that's run by our social media team. And really, that's all I'm on.
Yeah, that's okay.
I don't feel ready to navigate TikTok.
That's been a theme. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yay, thank you, Paige.
Yes.